episode 3 of New York City bike culture. I'm really pleased to sit here today with Sarah Chubb Sauvayre. I practiced my French this morning to honor my French teachers of the past. I'm really excited to have you here for a variety of reasons, and I don't think it's too much to say that you're a bit of an elder stateswoman of CRCA racing, at least, and maybe women's racing and racing in New York City. And with that comes a lot of, I think, knowledge institutionally of the community, maybe most specifically the bike racing community. But I think you have a lot of knowledge to offer. You currently are in a great position of not having a specific responsibility within that community as in an elected position or something, so you can speak as an individual and with that perspective of someone who maybe has a lot of experience and has seen a lot and has a lot of thoughts. And also, I think Sarah is a very fierce racer. She doesn't maybe look that way, but there's certain situation where you can see a little glimmer in her eyes, and you know it's on, or she's serious about something. And I have not had to race against her, and I'm happy about that sometimes because I know she's very smart about that. But that's a lot of me talking. Sarah, I should say also, I want to say that off the bat, you are a 2-time national champion on the bicycle. You can tell us more about all the details of that later. And I believe you work as an independent consultant now in kind of the digital media realm, right?
I do.
So tell us a little bit more maybe about yourself. You're sort of a New Yorker, or you consider yourself a New Yorker now, or have always been, and where you coming from, and how did you get into, then eventually how did you get into bicycles? But yeah.
Okay. So I'm not a New Yorker originally, but I grew up about an hour outside of New York in New Jersey, and my dad commuted to New York for work.
Keep going. Sorry.
So, I came into New York, but it was definitely the big city. I grew up really in the country, pretty rural at the time, and never really thought I would end up here, actually. And I've been here since 1984, so
this is just outside, far enough outside, and back then it was probably different of like what we consider now almost suburbs of New York City, kind of in New Jersey.
Not at all the suburbs. If you've ever raced Giro di Cielo, it's not quite that far out, but that's what the countryside was like back then, and parts of it still are, but that's not that far from where I grew up.
Wow, okay, yeah.
Lots of farms.
That is very different,
It's very different.
It's close to New York City, but all of a sudden you feel like you're more in central Pennsylvania or something like that. Yeah,
we'd come in to go to a museum or to go to a show, but not. My dad worked here, so he was not interested in being in New York for recreation. So, it was a really great place to be a kid because we were outdoors all the time, and I loved sports from when I was little. I went to a school as elementary school where we played competitive sports from when we were about 11.
Wow. Okay.
And the girls and the boys, and I loved it.
Which at that time, was that not revolutionary, maybe strong, but maybe not that common that you had competitive sports on the women's side?
It was not that common.
It was not that common, yeah.
I was fortunate because the schools that I ended up going to, sports were important, and they had girls participating almost as much as the boys. And I came from a very sporty family. My parents were athletes. Vacations were skiing vacations or sailing vacations. My mom was a better tennis player than my dad, who was pretty good, and very competitive in a silly way, all of us together. So I was a competitive runner in high school, and I played a bunch of sports, and ended up playing sports in college also.
Okay. Can I ask what sports? So it sounds like you've kind of really tried a few, maybe even.
I played a bunch of sports. So I was recruited in college for field hockey and track, and I ended up also playing soccer and lacrosse.
Wow. All four in
I
college?
played all, well, so I switched from field hockey to soccer because it's where all the cool kids were, and I liked it. I wasn't really very good, but I was fast, so I found a place on the team eventually. And just it was a really big part of my life. I found that I still feel the same way. It makes me feel so alive, and I love to compete. And I also love the team aspect of it. All my best friends in high school and college were people that I met on teams. And I found that once I got into the working world, it was actually a great background to take into sort of a corporate job because I was used
especially
to
in the city, I would imagine.
And I ended up in my career as a manager pretty young, and I knew how to do a lot of things, partly because I had negotiated sports captainships, how to deal with preparing for something big. I think Title IX happened a little bit before my collegiate experience, and it was a fantastic thing. And I think that has been so important. I think if you look at a lot of women leaders now, younger than me, who are leading big companies, many of them came out of competitive sports backgrounds.
Yeah.
I just happen to also love it. So even at times when friends or peers thought it was really weird, I continued to race and compete.
Wow. Okay. So the competition that was like almost given to you from in the cradle, kind of from the family, and then it was well groomed throughout all your different sporting experiences, and you clearly took that with you then, like you said, to your profession, and really helped you there. Also the kind of organizational skills you learned there, also the leadership skills you learned there. Fast forward, or when, I'm assuming you probably knew how to ride a bike. You probably rode a bike around a little bit, at least where you grew up. I don't know, I'm imagining you were riding on some farm roads, but maybe that was not ideal because there might be a lot of traffic or something. But was bike riding always just kind of, I can ride a bike, but that was about it?
It was. When I graduated from college, I took some time right after graduation and went with a very close friend and my younger sister and biked through Europe. And we didn't know anything about bikes. We started in England, and one of us, I can't remember which one, had a flat tire coming out of the box, coming from the plane, and someone had to help us change it because it hadn't occurred to us to figure out how to do that before we left. And we were tours, we had the panniers, and it was fantastic. It was so much fun. But I never thought about racing. When I first moved to New York, I ran for fun, but I wasn't competing anymore. And in college, I only ran the first couple of years because I was interested in other things. And I got into competing again, but I wasn't ever riding a bike. I ended up on the bike because I got injured running. So I got back into competition and running, and I found my husband Pascal, who you know, was on a team when I first met him, and so he brought me into the team he ran with. And there was a fantastic coach with an amazing background, and he just really good. And so I started running track again, and I had been a 100-meter and 200-meter runner, and I moved up to the 800, which is my favorite event ever. And I
so this is post-college at kind of an amateur level, those kind of track distance. I feel like you got to be pretty dedicated and find a club who does that.
It was fantastic.
Yeah.
We raced. I ran the Fifth Avenue Mile with the elite group. It was.
So you're fast.
I loved the 800. Yeah. So I had 200-meter speed as a high schooler and collegiate runner, and the coach that I had in my adult life said, "Well, didn't they ever put you into the 400?" And I hated the 400 because it was so hard.
Yeah.
It was really hard, and he pushed me to try the 8, and I loved it. The 15 I was okay at, but I was okay at the 800. So we ran at Madison Square Garden in the Colgate Women's Games. Wow. It was really fun. So I think that kind of thing is fun. It did take a lot of time, and we did a lot of training, and found that all the track training in the winter made me faster on the road. But I got injured. I hurt my back. I was working at Vogue magazine and was wearing shoes with heels on them. And it's just not a good combination.
It can be good for your recovery, and your muscles are always tense.
and I hurt my back pretty badly, and I tried to come back.
Oh, so it was the back?
Times. It was my lower back.
It wasn't the legs. Okay, when you feel the feet. Yeah.
And eventually, I mean, every runner has all sorts of little things, but this was harder. And I kept trying to come back, and I was cross-training on the bike, and Pascal was also racing with CRCA, which was a long time ago. This was probably late 90s, mid-late 90s.
So at this point, you had already been kind of taking up bike riding as a, like you said, a cross-training kind of, and Pascal was riding, so you kind of rode together a little bit.
Yeah, but I didn't, we would go riding in the park, and he didn't understand why I wouldn't draft him. I was terrified. Going down the hill at 110th Street, I had my brakes on the whole time. I didn't know really how to ride a bike. But as happens, I got stronger, and I felt better, and you start to feel good. And he worked on me for months. I finally went to a CRCA race, and I think I was wearing a hooded sweatshirt because that's what I had.
I'm sure it was March and it was cold too, so
it was. I think it said Vogue magazine on it. I'm pretty sure it did. And I got dropped after I think I got dropped on the hill, and I cut off the bottom because they had told me I could do that. I was with the C's. There were no women's races.
I was just going to ask you that.
I think back then there were a couple of women's races a year. This was probably 1997.
Oh, that is okay. Yeah, okay.
And
in 1997? Wow. Okay.
So yeah, 2 or 3. And I went back every week because there used to be a race pretty much every weekend, and the races used to go into the fall, and it was the fall.
Yeah.
And I was hang on a little longer, and I learned how to get on a wheel. And actually, Jim Boyd was racing back then, and a lot of people in the club today don't even know that Jim. They may know that Jim's a person because they've seen him at the
I've
parties.
met him once when he handed over the Jim Boyd Award to I think Alan Rigo a couple of years ago, 2 or 3, maybe 3 years
he
ago
used
now.
To race.
And
and actually Jim, a little trivia for you. It was pre-internet really. If you wanted to know if there was a race on Saturday, you called Jim's answering machine, and it would say, okay, on Saturday the race starts at this time, etc.
His answering machine.
His answering machine.
So you'd have to redo it for every race.
He was so amazing, and he was fantastic to me because he knew I didn't know what I was doing, and there were only a handful of women at all, and I was in the C field, and the women who were there were really much better than me, so they tended to be in the B field, and he would tell me not to overlap the wheel, and he would tell me to move up, and I finally figured out that if I found someone and stuck to
So
the
he was
wheel,
riding in the
easier.
C field at that point.
He was. And there were a couple of guys who don't ride anymore who were around Jim's era who really helped me a lot. And so the following year, I joined a team that does not in any way resemble the teams you see now. The jerseys didn't fit anybody. It was the original Setanta, actually. It was a great group of people.
I've heard of that. Yeah.
And they taught me a lot, and the women on the team taught me a lot. Christy Roberts, who still rides with CRCA, she's on the Dave Jordan team.
Okay.
And what I found was I was still having a hard time running. I still thought, I think in my back of my mind, I still think someday I'll go back to running.
I was going to say, you still haven't quite given up, yeah.
But back then, I was just so intrigued by the tactical stuff. So that's one of the things they taught me. And also just when you're new, you get stronger all the time. So there's that sort of seductive thing of you just, every week you're a little stronger and you stay in a little longer. And they would combine the B and the C field because there weren't enough people, and I would stay with the B field, and I couldn't believe it. And it was just so much fun.
You kept having a carrot to chase, kind of. Yeah. But I think when you describe that, it's 1997, it's March, there's 4 women in a field of beginner men on a cold day. I think that takes a certain type of personality and competitiveness and willingness to persevere to some extent. Because not everybody would see that as fun, probably.
No, and it was 6 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah,
right?
Right. Yeah.
That was one of the reasons Pascal had to work on me for so long, was I was scared, and it was really early in the morning. So
the riding in a group experience, especially with maybe some beginner men who can be a little erratic and overly confident.
And we also actually had I forgot. We had a pretty small child also, so we figured out a babysitter who was willing to come early in the morning. And one of the advantages, besides the fact that I do love to compete and I love to be out there and sort of that in the early days it was more like, oh, I thrashed myself for 2 hours, I feel great. And I can now go on to the rest of my day.
It gives you a wonderful boost. Yeah.
It gives you a great boost, and then I'd go home and it was still, I had the whole day with my daughter, and we're very strange to most people, but I thought it was fun. So I guess as we progressed, the CRCA was also progressing. There were more women, there were more teams. CRCA started to field more women's races. And at the time, there were races in Prospect Park, too, that Casino was running where, and I don't know if you've ever done any of these, but they would have the women ride with the masters, and then the women would do one extra lap after that for their finish.
Okay. Yeah.
And so, I went and rode in Prospect Park, and that was hard too. Riding with the men was.
So this was in Prospect Park, not
yes,
Central Park, right? Yeah.
Prospect.
Okay.
So I mean, the first year I just did a handful. I started in the fall and did a handful of CRCA races, and I loved it. And came back the following year and rode with Casino also.
Yeah.
I then had another baby and came back really fast because I had this, and this may be interesting to some of the people who are of that age that I was at the time. 2 kids, both of us work. It would have been very easy to say, okay, that was fun, I'm done.
Yeah.
Pascal can go race, because this happens all the time. Mm-hmm. And I was not at all interested in being left home. And I have to say for him, he was not really interested in having me stay home. So we had the same babysitter who was nuts and needed the money and liked coming early. And I went back to racing. My first race was in Prospect, and my second daughter was 5 weeks old. Much easier delivery than the first time. I felt pretty okay, and I got dropped on the hill the first lap. Yeah. And I thought I was actually doing okay. I thought I was fitter than I actually was. It was July, and everybody was peaking, and it was horrible. I was so mad. And that's how I got back in shape, was by going to races and staying in as long as I could. And it was hard. But it was already July by then, and by the following season, I was back in shape. So
that was not what the doctor recommended, probably, though.
The doctor was not impressed at all. My parents were horrified, and my in-laws came to visit from France, and they were so horrified. And my mother-in-law kept taking my husband aside and asking him whether he should be taking better care of me, which I thought was very funny. So
that is interesting. Europe's the old continent in some ways there, but I think the woman working at the time and then going back to a sport, even though you would maybe expect as a cyclist the French are in love with cycling and they would support that, but that may not have been his family. So it's interesting to hear that.
I think it had more to do with just we had a lot on our plates, and 2 little kids. So you get up at 4:30. I mean, now.
Yeah.
You go and you race, and you come home, and they want to do the full out things they want to do, and so you have some coffee and you will do it. And I say that physically exhausting sort of era in our lives, but we were just packing a lot of stuff in. So
I think you need a lot of energy for that, and like I said, I think not everybody has the ability to kind of go through that, but you kind of stuck with it ever since, right? That's my impression. You've never really paused. You've kept riding and racing, and
I really love it. I was thinking about this before I came down here. I've had a bunch of different sort of...
She rode down here, of course, on a road bike. Yeah.
Bike. I've had a bunch of different phases, right? So there's the beginner phase where you just keep getting stronger and you don't expect very much. And then I had sort of a middle phase where I was trying to see if I could get good. And we had a fantastic team, the Comedy Central women's team.
I hear about the Comedy Central team, and it was before my time here, but I hear
really
good things.
Great sponsors. We were a really tight group that worked well together, and we had a lot of strong riders.
Yeah.
And we a lot of us had been recent beginners, and there was one year where we're like, you know what? Let's try to win the team cup next year, because we were sort of this ragtag bunch of friends.
Yeah.
And we did it, and it took a lot. And it came down, actually, if I remember correctly, which I might not, but if I remember correctly, it came down to the last couple of races, and there was a team in the park that was sort of they were going to a lot of the big pro races.
Yeah, right.
And they needed to win, or we needed to win, and it mattered who came in second and all of that stuff. And another teammate and I got into a break with two of them, and they knew that I could sprint, and neither one of them was a sprinter. They were climbers. They were much stronger than I was. And I'm embarrassed, but not really, to say I just sat on them because there were two of them. And I have a picture somewhere, and I'm not going to mention names, but it's a friend of mine, but she was on the other team, of her face after the finish, because she wasn't mad, but she was really disappointed because I was able to beat them, and we won the team cup, and we were not the favorites in any way.
Right.
And that was really fun. So that was sort of the beginning of me thinking, this team is really good. We started I upgraded from a 3 to a 2. We started noticing that some of our friends in the peloton here were going to big races like Liberty and Philadelphia. And once you're a 2, also, if you go to Fitchburg, you're riding with the 1, 2, 3 field back in those days. And it was really hard, but in that phase, we were competitive at the local level, but I wanted to try some of these sort of scary races, and we went and did Philadelphia several different times.
Yeah, which is currently off, I think, for both the men's. Is the women's race on still-ish?
Not the way it used to be.
Not the way it used to be, certainly. I know
though
Fitchburg I think it's only 1 day accrued now in Massachusetts, and it's still there, but I think it doesn't have its former status anymore either.
It used to be an amazing stage race. There used to be a whole bunch of really amazing stage races, and all the local pros would come. And Philly, if I'm remembering that one correctly, Philly was often a week or so before the national championships.
Okay.
And so the U.S. pro teams would all be there, and sometimes the European ones would. So I have a picture of the start line one year when Judith Arndt from Germany was wearing the World Championship stripes,
one of
and
the
I was
early,
behind
really strong
her.
riders. Yeah.
We were at the start, and I was behind her thinking, what am I doing here? So I did Philly, I think, 4 times, and the first time I did it, I got dropped on the last lap.
Yeah.
And the next 2 times I finished it, and finishing it was a really big deal.
Oh, I think going from Central Park racing to that kind of race is,
it was
jumping
an
a couple of levels there.
experience.
Yeah.
And so you had to plan how you were going to ride the race, and
just to finish.
And so I don't know if you've ever ridden that course, but the Manayunk wall.
I've only seen the pros do it on TV. Yeah.
The wall is really hard, but actually coming into the wall, there's a chicane. So there's really tricky stuff, which I don't love, and cobblestones, and then the wall. And so really, for someone like me, because I don't love the tricky stuff, I had to make sure I was really far forward, which is hard.
Yeah.
And it was just one of those personal milestone things.
Sure.
So, and then, from there, I'd say when I hit 40, so again, I've been doing this a long time, as the dates tell you. I hit 40, I thought, I guess I'm done, and then I realized, no, I'm really not, and started thinking about Masters Nationals, and because I'm not as much a sprinter as I used to be, just because I'm older and you lose body mass. And
is that relative to your peers, though, in the age group, though, or do you just feel that when you're sprinting against some 20-something-year-olds?
Yeah, okay.
So, I think we've talked a lot about the competitive side, and I think that's what you enjoy. And we've already talked about how it takes someone with a competitive mindset to maybe start at a time, even the late 90s, where there were very few women. Fortunately now, we still talk about how there's relatively few women in the sport. Relative, I think the numbers vary every year, but I think it's in the 10 to 20% usually. I think if you look at USA Cycling members, we're talking about racing now. I think, fortunately, when I ride around New York, I see more and more women on bicycles, which is no small feat in the city either, because it can be a very scary place to ride, and I think that's a big hurdle to overcome. If you develop confidence, and that becomes normal to some extent, and which is similar to racing, I think, too, where, again, in a big group, and in a peloton, and fortunately now most of the time there's dedicated women's fields. CRCA always has a dedicated, always has a dedicated women's field. I had to check myself, which is fantastic. And even the beginners field, I think, 2 or 3 times a year, right? Beginners only, which is also fantastic. So are we in a good place now? Should we settle? Settle is maybe the wrong word, but there's still a lot of conversations around how we need to have more women in the sport, which is a conversation in other sports too. But then people talk triathlon. Oh, look at triathlon; they have 50% women or something like that, or a very high percentage, or even more than the men.
You want to look at this out, or you take time?
I'll take my time. Give me 2 minutes. Thank you. The question then is, what do you see, not being in a leadership position, but you, like I said, maybe an other stateswoman of the community, of the bike racing community, and I'm sure I'm forgetting some other people who also have similar roles, but what do you see are the challenges and maybe also the opportunities we have with that? And again, keeping in mind that maybe things have gotten, and I don't want to be that incremental change is the only thing we need, and things have gotten better. I don't want to say we should be happy with where we are right now. The fields are on the smaller side, but I'm not in the women's field. I'm not racing. I only see it from the outside, and even the conversations about it are often male dominated. So,
I guess I'd say a couple of things about that. I think that the club has been doing and continues to do a really good job of creating opportunities for women to then take advantage of. So the development field, the clinics, the CRCA coaching and things like that.
Yeah, I talked about with Lucia quite a bit. Yeah,
there's a lot of opportunity.
Which I imagine has changed quite a lot from what was offered back then.
Yes. The clinic's been around for a long time, but it was sort of a one-time gig, and it's bigger than it was, and also there's sort of feeders into it. And if you want to start racing, I started racing with a bunch of guys I didn't know, and you could start racing in the development field. So that leap I had to take to do it, I wouldn't have done without Pascal's encouragement. And now, if you have a girlfriend and you are both thinking about it, you can go do the women's development field, whereas that was not what it was like back then. So I think the CRCA is actually doing a pretty good job in making those available. I think there's sort of two things. There's further down as you go younger, there's almost no opportunity for a younger girl to learn how to ride a bike and get into racing. And racing is hard. It's it's scary, it's expensive, it's dangerous. So
it's fun too, we should say. But yes,
it is very fun.
Right,
as I keep saying.
That's fine. Yeah, that makes sense.
But so where does that pipeline come from? So it might come from the cycle club, it might come from the triathlon group. I think that there are actually a lot of women in the club who do a really good job of trying to bring more women in. But
they see a woman on the road and they say,
I think
have
all
you
of
thought
us
about,
do it. And every year there are new riders who come into the club exactly that way, right? Someone just kind of talk to them.
See them ride in the park or something.
I would love to see more programs in the younger age groups, and that goes for boys too. But for girls, I just don't think they even think of it. And this year we've talked also a lot about how can we make the club more diverse, how can we make the club more welcoming to people who don't look like 98% of the club, because it is a pretty white, affluent group.
Talked about quite a bit. This is Manhattan. It reflects where it is.
Sport.
Right.
But yes, very much so reflects where it is. So, I'm hoping that over the next year or so, the club actually is successful in encouraging people to sort of reach out into other kinds of programs to bring other types of people into the sport. The other thing I would say is that the women do a lot to bring women into the sport, and that's great. And the women's clinic is a terrific example of that. I actually think that one of the things that helped me so much when I was new was actually riding with men. And so there's a little bit of and I've had this conversation with a couple of people around things like the clinic. We had this conversation last year around guys from our team helping coach the women's clinic. And there was definitely a feeling of, no, it has to be women so that the women are comfortable. And I totally understand that, but I actually think that the guys have a lot to offer too, and it would be good for the guys, actually, too. So I don't have a solution to it, but I think there are a lot of us who we do whatever we can when we see somebody on the road. I mean, I'm sort of infamous with my bike friends for asking people whether they've gotten a proper bike fit.
Yeah.
Do they, because I see anybody on a bike and I want to try to help them.
Right.
And it's a pretty short hop from there to how often do you ride and have you ever thought about racing and would you like to come to our clinic? So,
Yeah.
But it is a tough one.
It puts a lot of initiative and, or just a strong word, but initiative on individual members reaching out and recruiting. Yeah.
It does. I think the fact that the club has created these opportunities helps the rest of us, because if you do want to try to help bring someone in, there's an easy place to send them, which was not always
Right,
the
the
case. We had the
clinic
clinic once
yeah.
a year, and now there's all these different opportunities.
Yeah.
So, and money is a factor, obviously,
Sure. Yeah.
and the club has done a really nice job of finding sponsors and putting resources towards women's events. So sure, it could be more, and there could be more women in them, but the events themselves, I think, are pretty great.
Yeah. So it's under development. It's always an ongoing project. Do you think that with the professional side of it becoming more visible, I would say, and maybe also there being more spots in the let's be realistic, there's still very few, I think, women who can actually live off being a professional cyclist. But with that becoming a little bit more visible, I think, and more supported by the industry and the whole community, I think, certainly in the United States. Do you think there's going to be a trickle-down effect, and maybe also combined with, we see COVID, more people on bikes, or are you skeptical that is going to be causing much of a change in, let's say, people riding, women riding for CRCA, or in CRCA, or any other bike racing club?
I don't think that pro women get enough exposure to actually have any impact on local women thinking they want to ride. I think that when a local woman gets excited about riding and wants to learn more, and then they discover they can subscribe to one of the streaming channels and watch other women race, that's exciting, but I don't think it happens in the other way. It's too fringe. I actually am, and I don't want to be a downer, but I actually think that the collegiate cycling world was more visible 5 years ago than it is right now.
Yeah. Don't get me started on
aside,
that. I have a couple of personal opinions on that too.
Yeah.
But yeah.
COVID aside, I just I don't know why that is. I don't really have any insight as to why that is, but that would be a great way for women to continue in the sport. And I was really encouraged about 5-6 years ago, and even 10 years ago, to see more teams, more schools had teams. My college had a club team. They had a club team for years, but they started going everywhere and competing and going to nationals. And I was like, wow, that's so cool. They never had that.
Yeah.
And I think they still do, but it's not. I don't see the visibility the way it used to.
Yeah.
It may just be that me, but it's a hard sport, and people fall hard for it.
Yeah.
It's like when you fall in love with cycling, it's pretty cool, but it's not an easy entry. And one of the reasons I guess I was thinking about, it's important to have the men somewhat involved in some way as the women are coming to the sport is it's intimidating in the beginning, right? So I was coming in with my husband, but I would go to a bike shop on my own, and the guys would barely talk to me, and it doesn't happen to me anymore because I know what I'm doing. But I remember a local bike shop selling me this particular lube, and I was by myself, and it was this clear jelly-ish lube. I forget what it was called. And it was our local bike shop, and about 3 weeks later, Pascal and I went in there, and he wanted to buy a particular lube that he likes, because I just bought the one they sold me. And I said, oh, well, no, they recommended this other one. And the guy said, oh, no, bro, you don't want that. And he sold the girl the bad, stupid lube, and they didn't want the guy to make the mistake of buying the bad, stupid lube. And I was furious. Clearly, because it was years ago, and I still remember. It still makes me mad.
Because he had the credit as the bike racer, he looked like a bike racer, or was it just, you think it was just gender?
I think he's a guy.
Really?
Yeah, there's a whole thing. I haven't heard about it recently, but I'm sure it still exists. There was sort of a meme around women going into bike shops because you don't get taken seriously. They'll sell you the stupid thing. And I've had it happen to me, not as much recently because I have a bike shop and they know me well and I only go there.
bicycle being a more complicated machine kind of. In running, it's like you can only get upsold or sold the wrong thing so much. There's only really shoes, and yes, the other pieces also matter. I run enough, but there's not so many things and parts of the bicycle you need to know, or you need to know that exist or could break, or and oftentimes you don't find out about something being a particular problem until you've broken it. That was certainly my experience too, starting, and you don't know about that, and then you walk into a bike shop and there's all these different things you could buy, and it's a lot of knowledge to acquire, I think, for everybody. How did we get here? Let's transition to another topic that I asked you to kind of, and this is maybe you can tell if it's your opinion or you can reflect a little bit of opinions in the group. I think this year COVID and racial justice and equality or inequality has really taken over the headlines for obvious reasons. But a year or two ago, certainly last year, I feel like there's always a lot of things that have been talked about in the bike racing, bike riding community. But with bike racing specifically, the more of an awareness, and I think it's been a little bit more in some of the bike media too, of transgender athletes, and specifically usually, and I'm probably going to butcher the terminology here because I'm still learning a little bit too and I'm getting used to it, but transgender female, I think you would say, athletes joining the regular women's fields, and cycling always haven't had a very clear distinction between a women's and a men's field, and it has the categories too, so in a lot of ways it's a very structured kind of system, and there was a transgender woman who won a Masters track world championship, I believe, actually, and obviously that brings a little bit of media attention, and I think then people comment online, but what's the feel, maybe from your perspective, in the women's part of the community there? Because I think they're all competitors, so it would be easy to say, well, you're introducing potentially strong competitors into a field. I think that's been an argument that's been made a lot, that if you want to put it kindly, I think have an unfair advantage, I think is the argument that gets made a lot. What have you seen in the women's field? Because again, I'm only looking from the inside out, and
Sure. So I've been racing with transgender athletes for years. It's just talked about now more than it ever was. I would say that there's certainly people who haven't really read the science, who feel that this is an argument around strength, etc. And sure, if you're racing with someone who's much larger than you, because for me, many people are larger than I am. I'm just I'm not a large person. Then there's a sense of, oh, they must have an advantage because they're stronger. But I actually have found, and maybe it's because we're in the East Coast bubble, but in my experience, it has never really been an issue. Or talked about in any way other than, oh, that's Liz, or that's so-and-so. I am pretty sure that at Masters Nationals for Road, there are several transgender athletes. I don't think they're not people
across
that I know.
Across age groups.
They're not in my age group. I don't, in the women's, maybe it's because there's so few of us, I find the women's peloton so supportive generally, and there's always going to be outliers. There's always going to be people who are not, who I want to hang around with all the time because they're not that nice. But generally speaking, I would say extremely supportive. And if you do read the science, most of what you'll find is that you'll see that it's not a competitive advantage. So I think that it's been talked about a lot since the USA Cycling made a determination, and I was really glad that they did, because
I was going to bring that up. They came out fairly strongly with it boils down to them saying you can race whatever category you want in whatever field you want. It's a little bit more complicated than that, because in the end you do need, I think, depending on what level you want to compete at, you need to have some sort of, there needs to be some time period of change, and the doctors need to weigh in a little bit. But long story short, I think it's a fairly clear statement that you can choose what category or what gender-based category you want to compete in, I think.
Right. And actually, if my teammate Lucia were here, we could have a very long conversation about the meaning of gender.
Yeah.
Which I'm not equipped or qualified to do, but
I have plans for lots of people coming still, and I think she's
it's a pretty interesting
she's on
conversation.
I think I know what you're talking about, and I think I will ask her sooner or later, certainly. But I don't want to make you the spokesman for all of that, and I think it's good to say that I'm not an expert. Exactly. Yeah. So overall, almost a non-issue. Certainly, I think you said the community and the really the welcoming atmosphere in the community, and just really people taking care of each other takes care of that. And it's never been an issue that you've seen.
That's been my experience.
If it hadn't gotten
I'm sure
a lot
it
of
hasn't
attention.
been everyone's experience, but that's been my experience. And again, maybe because there are so few of us, we are happy to have more of us. So, and I'm sure there have been much worse experiences, but I've mostly experienced.
That's your experience. Yeah, and then we are in New York City, and I think we all know that this is not the most conservative place to be in the country. So, let me look at what else we have. What else I would like to ask you? There's a lot, but I know you could talk for a while, and I would love to hear that about your racing and your experiences. But we've talked about women become more welcoming. Yeah. So maybe because again, we talked a little bit about this before. Yes, you're a woman. I've called you a stateswoman, but I don't want to just talk about women-specific issues. What do you see? And you can talk, I think, what comes to mind, or you can talk about what really you see as the issues, whether it's local or regional or national level, or if it. What are the issues and challenges you see for? I think we've talked a lot about road racing, and that's really where your heart and passion lies. So, what for road racing, whether in the city or more regional, nationally, what do you see as the challenges that we're facing right now? What are some of the hurdles we need to overcome? Is there anything that comes to mind for you when you look at the state of road cycling at the amateur level right now?
Yep. Honestly, I'd love to see, actually, if you step back even from racing, I'd love to see more bike-friendly infrastructure in the country. So, you have to get people on bikes first. And, if you're worried about the environment, which I think we all are, like more people commuting on bikes, going places on bikes, more cities that made it easy and not terrifying to ride places on bikes. And I think that don't really want to get into politics, but this election is incredibly important because I happen to believe in the progressive agenda, and the part of the progressive agenda is figuring out alternative energy sources and ways of making cities more livable, but also ways of trying to deal with things like structural racism and making the world good for more than just the top piece of the population. And that's good for biking. Because if you go out to Newark, you don't see a lot of bike lanes, or if you do, you see them in the parts of town where white people live or people with money live. And it doesn't mean that there aren't kids out there who want to ride bikes.
Right.
So I think that bike racing may never be a huge sport here, and it may have peaked during Lance, and there may be other peaks down the road when somebody who's clean is really good and comes along.
There's a few young folks right now who are talented, have the potential.
And we have to come out of all of the economic disaster of COVID so that people want to sponsor bike races again, because right now,
or even host them, because there's a lot of pressure on people not to host them as well.
But imagine, I would be very happy if we were 5 years down the road and every city across the country, it was really easy to ride a bike, and actually really easy for kids who didn't have a lot of money to find a place where someone could help them learn how to ride a bike, find a bike. Because it's, that when I first got back on the bike, when I was injured and from running, and I wanted to just ride a bike because I wanted to burn calories mostly. That feeling of being a little kid, that's what the bike does for you, right? This is amazing. And running is great, but running doesn't really do that. It doesn't really bring back, when I was 8 and I rode my bike down the road. But
there's a
every
certain
kid should do
ease
that.
and the feeling of the speed to bike riding. I think that
Freedom.
the freedom of movement, you get places much faster.
Yeah.
I think running to a lot of people is just a struggle. And I totally get that. You much more feel the weight that you have to move in the body. And
Yeah, you can get to where you want to go, and it's pleasant. And so anyway, that I would love to see that actually be real. There are a couple of good programs in the city. I don't even know what their status is right now because of COVID.
Yeah.
You know, to try to get inner city kids on bikes or kids
Yeah.
who just don't have access to them on
Yeah.
bikes. But also, New York has to change. And actually, I think there was some good progress during COVID because so many people were riding.
Yeah.
That's good. But we just hope it doesn't backslide.
in some ways, New York strikes me. I hesitate to call it bike friendly, but I think in a lot of ways there are, at least like you said, in certain parts of town, say Manhattan, say northern Brooklyn, there is pretty good infrastructure, at least in theory. The reality is often there's all kinds of obstacles in the bike lane, there's all kinds of other stuff going on, there's construction, there's whatnot. So do you think New York City needs to change radically still, or is there a good starting point in terms of the bike infrastructure that we see here? So what you probably took the bike path on the west side, which is pretty good, but
Kind of great. Yeah.
should there be more of that? And I'm sure you've seen a lot of changes in the last 20, 30 years.
Oh God, yeah. Yeah, just the fact that there is a West Side bike path and that there are bike lanes and things, yes. I think if I try to think about how much change, and let's even call it 10 years, phenomenal amount of change. The cultural shift is important also, right?
Yeah.
So that thing of like, I thought that when the city bike thing started, that it seemed to me, because I was commuting to Midtown a little bit, that cars were more careful. And I wondered whether it's because they were more careful because they were afraid to kill a tourist.
Yeah.
Because there were people who didn't know how to. The city bike rides like this a lot.
Yeah.
But so the cultural change of please don't buzz me, please don't play in front of me and park in the bike lane, all that stuff is not quite there yet. But there's cities in Europe where no one would think of parking the bike lane.
Yeah.
Would never in a million years would be parking the bike lane. Here it's like what?
Yeah.
Stupid bike lane.
Yeah.
So
I personally, there's still too many cars in areas like Manhattan, and there has to be ways of limiting it at least, and not making it maybe impossible yet. But I think other cities around the world have tried to model that a little bit.
Close sections to cars entirely.
Or during limited times, or limit the number of cars, or just put a price tag on it or something like. Although I don't know if that will fix everything either. But
people were pretty mad about the congestion pricing, but I thought it was a good idea.
It takes a strong politician, I think, to go through unpopular measures, or measures unpopular with a lot of people. But that's a good, I think, transition point. Maybe coming back to you personally one more time, and the competitor in Sarah Sauvayre is still there, and I think I want to talk a little bit because we got cut off there earlier about what comes next, if you will. You just told us your age, I won't repeat it.
Thank you.
You are in a pretty good spot, I think, with your professional life. You have 2 daughters who are both out of college now, or almost. Yeah, both through college, and whatever comes next, good luck to them. And I know at least one of them was a fierce competitor too and played soccer. You have a husband who's still cycling also. You're not retiring yet from bike racing.
Nope. So I'll keep doing it as long as I'm enjoying it and as long as I'm physically capable of doing it. Pascal has the advantage. There's so many masters men's fields. He can go to a stage race and find a field. And I kind of hit the wall on the stage racing unless there's a master's field, because because I'm a Cat 1, I would be with the pro field and I can't stick with them. So
that's a tall ask,
Yeah, or I wait till the crit if I make it that far.
I would imagine there's very few women's Masters, stage races in the country, if at all, huh?
Yeah, one or two.
Yeah.
A couple.
You have to travel across the
You
whole
do.
country.
Joe Martin and
Joe
Tucson.
Martin. Yeah.
But anyway,
Yeah.
So I was saying to you when we were reading our board that I got my coaching license this year.
Yes.
I got the lowest level. I'm a beginner again. I enjoy working
Carrots
with...
to chase, so yes.
Exactly. I enjoy working with people who are new to cycling and who want to get good at racing, because what I love the most about it is the tactical stuff and the feel of the race, and understanding, because every race is different, understanding what's happening and then taking advantage of that moment or that particular race and what's unique about it to try stuff or to try to win or to whatever. And I really enjoy being on a team because we...
So, can I have the peanut butter pie, and then I'll take the check. Thank you. Yeah, you enjoy being on a team?
I enjoy being on a team because we help each other. Newer people who come onto the team, if they're willing, I'm very happy to help them with coaching.
And I've seen you do that to people on you're not, I think, shy to share in a good way, right? I think some people, there's a little bit of that stereotype of I think a lot of sports, but the older experienced racer is going to tell you what to do all the time, and some people really embrace that, and some people find that as patronizing in some way. And I think it's hard to strike that balance and figuring out who's willing to listen and who's willing to
cheesecake, apple crumb cake, or carrot cake?
Cheesecake, thank you.
I try to be careful about that, and often what I'll ask somebody, are you interested? Or I've noticed a few things, I would love to tell you about them, but if you're not interested, it's sort of like when I ask people, or I tell people that their saddle is too low, I usually apologize first, but I worry about their knees. And I do it with people who aren't on the team too, because there are not that many of us, and we should be trying to help each other. And I'm sure there are people who are like, oh my God, she's doing it again, but I'm interested in helping people who want to get better, sort of see what's happening that goes way beyond how fit they are. Because there are lots of people who are incredibly strong, who hit a plateau because they don't really understand what's happening in the race as much as they could. So I don't want that to sound patronizing either, but there's so many layers of what's happening in the race, right? There's like, what's he doing? How strong is he? Is that a good wheel? Is this a good place to attack? Is this a good, if it is, someone's going to attack.
There's some people who are really good at all of that, and there's some people who are really good at the engine of the training, and combining the two is the key. You can do both.
Right? So what I'm hoping by getting the license, I was actually supposed to coach a camp in France this summer, which I was looking forward to, but maybe next year. What I'm hoping to do with the coaching license is actually just try to share as much as I can with anybody who's interested.
I want to pick up on the coaching a little bit more. I kind of have to say, when you told me that you were getting a coaching license, I was almost surprised you didn't already have one, because it very much feels like you have been coaching people for a while. And being a coach can mean a lot of different things, but I really mean that mentoring, but more than just the mentoring, which is, I think, again, you described the welcoming atmosphere in the women's part of the community. But also then really, like you said, giving advice on bike fit, equipment, but a lot of like the race strategy and tactics and how to be a better bike racer, be a better bike rider also, I think bike handling. It feels like that should come really naturally to you, and you've done that a long time too. Is that something that is just kind of inherent? Is that something you developed over the years, or you saw other people do? Where did you pick that up, and why now? Was it the camp? Why now the license, I guess?
The license was the catalyst for getting the license, because I'd thought about it actually for a long time. Thank you. Was the camp, because I have been sort of informally doing coaching light, I guess, with
Yeah.
whoever will listen to me for a long time, but I wanted and needed a license for the camp.
Mm-hmm.
But once I started thinking about getting the license too, I realized it would open up other opportunities for me, whether it was to participate in the CRCA coaching, excuse me, or anything else more local. The camp in France sounded like a lot of fun, and my husband's family is near there, and it would have been a lot of fun. Maybe, and I'm hoping we do it next year. But
The plan for now is to do it next year.
yes. If you know anyone, let me know.
Okay. Yeah.
So I think it's partly my personality.
I should ask. Is there a website? I'll
Yes.
plug that. Okay. Good. You want to say it out loud real quick?
I'll have to give it to you after.
Okay, you'll give it to
I
me
don't want to get it
afterwards.
wrong because
Yeah.
it's not my website, so
Okay.
I have to make sure I had it right. So we used to joke around on the team that I was really bossy because I was the
You sound like a
captain.
good coach. Oh, the road captain, as they say. Yeah.
So I was the road captain, and hopefully I was bossy in a friendly way, but what I find fascinating about bike racing is all the tactical stuff, right? And
I think that can attract a lot of people. I really find that super enjoyable talking about it, but it's you can really nerd out with that, and it can be frustrating for other people who maybe the tactics don't always favor. So yeah, but anyway, so you got it. You
but
find
there's
that
tactical
interesting.
stuff that's besides the team tactics. For you need to understand. I mean, you know this, but it's sort of that idea that you need to understand what tools you have, and so every race is different, and how am I going to deploy the tools that I have in this race? And so there's individually understanding how to do that, and then there's the team tactic stuff, which is also fun. So it could be as simple as working on, and we do this in our team now, working on sprint form over and over and over again, right?
Yeah.
So the first year that I joined Veselka, I had two teammates.
I don't think I've ever said that. She is a teammate now, and
Yes.
she has been for 2 or 3 years. This would have been racing year season number 3, 4, 3. Yeah, that's what I thought.
And
I'll take a little bit more. Thank you.
I've been on some fabulous teams with great sponsors.
Yeah.
I've been very fortunate. But when I first joined Veselka, half of the women's team were new to me, and half of the women's team were people that I'd ridden with before.